Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're looking at Battlefield 5's recently released Battle Royale mode, Firestorm, and seeing how it compares both visually and from a gameplay perspective to Call of Duty Black Ops 4's Blackout mode. Now, of course, it should come as no surprise that Battlefield 5 will look better visually in just about every field. But I did want to also include a full breakdown of the gameplay features to determine which game actually executes the Battle Royale experience the best. Before we get started, bear in mind that both games are being recorded on the PC platform at a native 1440p resolution, and the graphical settings are all pushed as high as possible, except the motion blur option, which will be disabled in order to provide much clearer images. Also, since ray tracing is more of an experimental feature, I'll be keeping it disabled throughout most of these comparisons, but for the sake of demonstrating its capabilities, I will show what it looks like when it's enabled when I talk about the lighting. Alright, so to kick this comparison off, let's first look at the character models. The character models in Black Ops 4 are pretty well detailed, with clearly defined facial features, decent animation work, and an excellent level of detail to each of the uniforms. Battlefield's character models by comparison almost appear photorealistic, with excellent subsurface scattering to simulate realistic light interaction with the skin, and much higher resolution textures all around. The characters in Black Ops 4 appear blurry, almost as if they're being rendered at a lower resolution, whereas Battlefield appears crystal clear. But when viewed in-game, the differences become even more apparent. The characters in Call of Duty look far less realistic due to some basic shaders and shadowing. Battlefield's characters, while not nearly as detailed as what was shown in the character select screen, still offer a high level of detail, and the advanced lighting and shadowing effects help to bring out each of these details with more clarity. Both Battlefield and Call of Duty offer a fair amount of customization to help players personalize their experience. In Call of Duty, players can choose between a few preset basic soldiers, in addition to several character models from other Black Ops games and modes. BF5, however, only offers players their personalized multiplayer characters to use, both from the Allied and the Axis teams. The character customization is slightly more robust in Battlefield than what's available in Black Ops 4, allowing you to not only choose from preset faces, but also several different variations of World War II themed uniforms. Neither game really has a great level of customization for characters, but considering both games are going for a slightly more realistic aesthetic, it's difficult to justify the crazy cosmetic items you'll find in other, more popular Battle Royale experiences. Next up, let's look at the level of animation quality and the player controls that go along with them. Both games aim for a very smooth first-person experience, with players able to easily sprint, vault, and slide around the environment. Players in Call of Duty, however, will benefit from much faster movement, with players able to smoothly vault over obstacles and easily aim their weapons without a major penalty to weapon control and accuracy. A good example of this is jumping out of elevated windows. Since Battlefield's experience aims for a bit more realism, players that jump out of windows on the second or third floor will find it difficult to aim while falling, and their weapon will not be accessible immediately after hitting the ground, as the player begins a tumbling animation. Call of Duty, however, minimizes this penalty a great deal, and players can often jump out of some decently tall structures without taking damage. Sliding is also much easier to perform in Call of Duty, allowing players to slide for longer distances while firing their gun. You can slide in Battlefield 5, but it's not as responsive, and you can't slide very far before transitioning into a standard crouch stance. On the other hand, Battlefield's animation quality is still much higher. Characters move more realistically, shifting their balance as they make tight turns, and even the idle animations look less stiff. Lying prone in Battlefield allows for a full 360-degree turning radius, whereas Call of Duty's prone can frequently be blocked by whatever your legs get caught on in the environment. Speaking of which, let's talk about the environments in both games. Both games offer a massive map filled with large open valleys, small towns, and cliffsides. It's an impressive overall design, especially considering Call of Duty levels are typically very small arenas, but I think Treyarch successfully pulled this off. Call of Duty's map design smartly incorporates classic Call of Duty multiplayer and zombie locations within it, not only saving on development time, but also creating interesting locations to fight for control of. Battlefield's map, on the other hand, is built completely from scratch, and is easily the largest location ever featured in a Battlefield game. The map is a mix of frozen cliffsides, nearby towns, and valleys, with several small wooden houses spread around. There are a few key locations like dams and railroad stations, but for the most part, it feels like any other Battlefield map. As for the level of detail, Battlefield's seemingly less interesting map design is still packed to the brim with detail, far exceeding Call of Duty's more bland appearance. Firestorm's map is filled with various props and decorations, most of which can be destroyed with enough force. Call of Duty's map has some iconic structures, but there's very little decoration surrounding them. A lot of the trees and detail used in the maps in past games have been removed to balance out performance. If we take a closer look at some similar textures, we can again see that Battlefield is still leading the pack here, with much more realistic grass and dirt roads with better tessellation effects. Next up, we have lighting. Probably one of the most noticeable differences between these two games is the lighting design. Call of Duty's lighting design is typically decent when observing it from the smaller multiplayer levels, but Blackout's lighting feels incredibly outdated. Everything about it feels lifeless, with no volumetric effects or god rays anywhere to be found. The world feels washed out regardless of what season they set the map to every month, and the shadow quality just isn't up to par with Battlefield. Battlefield's lighting feels far more realistic, with proper global illumination, great god ray implementation, and dynamic cloud coverage that can change the overall feel of the scene. You can properly hide in shadows in Battlefield, whereas Call of Duty's lighting makes it so player models stand out regardless of where they're standing. Though this being a good or bad thing could boil down to your preference from a gameplay perspective. On top of all this, Battlefield also features the new NVIDIA ray tracing effects, allowing for proper real-time reflections off of various surfaces in the environment, though the hit to performance makes this less practical than it could be. As I mentioned before, the shadow quality is far superior in Battlefield, with much darker shadow casts and accurate shadow projections. Though I did find that Battlefield's character shadows had an annoying shimmer to the edges that doesn't exist as much in Call of Duty, likely because of the static lighting effects used in Blackout. Moving on, let's talk about some of the various special effects. Here we need to be careful because both games take place in different time periods, so various gadgets and their effects can appear differently because of this. But we can still get a pretty good idea of where these two games stand in relation to each other. First, let's observe what happens with each game's standard fragmentation grenade. Of course, these two grenades are supposedly years apart, but take a closer look at the quality of the fireballs and the amount of dirt and shrapnel from the explosion itself. The fireball in Battlefield has much more depth to it, with multiple layers of smoke and dirt to help make the explosion look more impressive. Call of Duty's explosion, while still pretty decent looking, doesn't feature nearly as much smoke or dirt, and fades almost instantly for a much less satisfying explosion. This is consistent with other comparisons I've done between these two franchises, but one thing that surprised me here was that the dynamic destruction often attributed to Battlefield isn't there. Unlike the base game, Battlefield 5's Firestorm does not feature the same level of dynamic destruction. The ground will not break apart with large craters, even when using several sticks of dynamite. Buildings will still break apart, and mostly collapse, especially during large artillery strikes, but the world feels slightly less destructive than usual. Call of Duty, of course, features little to no destructive properties, with only smaller objects like chain link fences or windows capable of being destroyed. Fire effects were a bit more challenging to compare, as I never managed to find any form of Molotov or incendiary grenade in Battlefield's Firestorm mode. Though I did take a look at a few of the fire effects built around the world, like wrecked vehicles and of course the Firestorm itself, and they seem to roughly match the quality of the player-made fires in the base game, and each sample of fire appeared much better in Battlefield than the disappointing Molotovs used in Blackout. Smoke effects also appear much more lifelike in Battlefield, however I had to give this one to Call of Duty for having smoke effects that are actually practical. The smoke grenades in Battlefield's Firestorm aren't nearly as useful as the smoke grenades used in the base game, and are borderline useless, as you can often see straight through the cloud. The smoke in Call of Duty not only looks decent enough, but also creates a much thicker cloud of smoke to hide in. The water effects appear to be a similar scenario. The surface of the water and the dynamic water simulation looks great in Battlefield 5, and it barely reacts at all to player interaction in Call of Duty. But again, Call of Duty's water is more practical from a gameplay perspective, as you can easily swim underwater freely, and even fire your weapons at enemies under the surface. This of course isn't the most realistic gameplay mechanic, but it does benefit the fluidity of the gameplay experience a great deal. So overall, from a visual standpoint at least, Battlefield looks significantly better in just about every way. The game's lighting, texture quality, dynamic effects, and overall level of detail is far beyond what's available in Call of Duty's Blackout mode. But the real question here is which game has the better overall Battle Royale experience? And to answer that, we need to take an in-depth look at the gameplay mechanics, starting with the player count. Call of Duty Blackout offers a large 88-player solo drop experience, with 100 players filling out the larger squad-based modes. Battlefield, on the other hand, only features 64 players total, but DICE has properly adjusted the starting map size to avoid the map ever feeling too empty. While a clear win for Call of Duty, the biggest problem in its current state is the active player count in the game. While not a problem on the PS4 or Xbox consoles, the PC platform has a disappointingly low active player count, making it impossible to find matches at times. That's not to say Battlefield is faring any better in this department. While still far more active, Battlefield 5's player count seems to be dwindling, and the average wait time for matches can range from 30 seconds to a minute, far longer than more popular Battle Royale games like PUBG or Apex. Once you do find a populated lobby, both games will drop the player into a warm-up mode, allowing them to run around, pick up weapons, and mindlessly shoot at nearby players without dealing damage. In Call of Duty, this warm-up mode allows you to freely explore the entire Blackout environment. But in Battlefield, you're locked inside an airplane hangar that will go dark after enough players have joined in. The actual plane drop is also very different between these two games. As I said before, the map in Battlefield is large, but cut in half each time you drop, in order to compensate for the smaller player count. This means you're limited to a smaller selection of places to visit on any given drop, and will often find it difficult to find a safe drop location. When you jump out of the helicopter in Blackout, you'll immediately switch to a third-person viewpoint of your character using a wingsuit, and you'll need to adjust your speed and your trajectory in order to maximize your distance. This mechanic is more involved and interesting than the basic airdrop design used in Firestorm, where you simply jump out of the plane in first person and need to point your character wherever you need to go. After landing, both games seem to function exactly the same way. You'll run into a nearby building, start spamming the interaction key, and pray you find a weapon powerful enough to stay alive. Many of the items between both games are very similar, but handled slightly differently. The health packs, for example, seem to be far more practical in Call of Duty. Rather than needing to swap to a different item in your inventory and then continuously use that item before switching back to your weapon like in Battlefield, players in Call of Duty can easily assign a medical item to a hotkey and press and hold that button to heal, interrupting that animation whenever they need to shoot. In Call of Duty, your armor sets come in 3 different varieties, level 1, 2, and 3, and they increase your overall damage threshold. But if your armor is damaged, you'll need to find armor plates to repair it, or find an entirely new set. In Battlefield, you'll start off with a set of broken level 1 armor, and will need to find armor plates to fix it as soon as you land. Finding level 2 and level 3 armor appears to function the same way though. The biggest change comes with the way these two games handle weapons and attachments. Call of Duty's weapons come in 2 forms: basic stripped weapons with no attachments, or more rare specialist weapons with some nice stats and preset attachments. You're more likely going to find the basic weapons when playing Blackout, and will need to explore the various buildings to find useful attachments to expand that weapon's effectiveness. Battlefield is one of the first Battle Royale experiences I've played in a long time that doesn't have attachments lying on the ground. You can't find scopes or extended mags and equip them to your weapons, but instead need to find various tiers of weapons with attachments already equipped. This lack of player customization really hurts the feel of Firestorm, and I'm disappointed they couldn't find a way to incorporate basic scopes and extended mag pickups like in Call of Duty. In addition to weapon attachments, players in Call of Duty can also find special perk packs and gadgets to give them the proper edge in combat. These really help to mix up the experience, with players capable of grappling around, reconning the area with drones, or silently moving through buildings without audible footsteps. While Battlefield has a few basic gadgets like landmines and grenade launchers, it also does something unlike any other Battle Royale, by introducing massive war machines to the experience. Hidden around the Firestorm map are several bunkers, which can be opened manually by turning large handles on the sides. Opening these bunkers will trigger a loud alarm, alerting nearby players to your presence, but if you and your team succeeds, you can drive a powerful tank onto the field. While seemingly powerful, these tanks are challenging to use in this guerrilla warfare style of gameplay, especially with players finding Panzerfaust rockets in almost every building. But it's still a very cool idea that adds a nice twist to the formula. Call of Duty offers vehicles too, but they only function as transports and have no offensive capabilities outside of roadkills. The circle appears to function mostly the same between both games, closing every couple of minutes and dealing increased amounts of damage to players standing outside. But Battlefield's Firestorm effect gives the edge of the play zone a much more intimidating appearance, while also preventing those obnoxious moments where players will shoot you from outside the circle. Finally, let's listen to a few sound comparisons. Which game do you think has the better overall sound design? And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, I think it's safe to say that Battlefield 5 has clearly provided a superior visual presentation, but the gameplay experience is a bit of a toss-up. On the one hand, Battlefield's combat is already finely tuned for this medium to long-range guerrilla warfare experience, and seems to function very nicely. But I have to give props to Treyarch for finding a way to properly adapt the close-quarter style combat of Call of Duty to a much larger scope, and to do so with that trademark level of quality and polish that the series has been known for. Moving around feels far more fluid in Call of Duty, and the actual gameplay mechanics seem to function more smoothly in Blackout than they do in Firestorm. But what do you guys think? Do you think Battlefield 5's new Firestorm mode is better overall, or did you like some of the work that was done for Call of Duty's Blackout mode? Let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this posted every week.